The Corvani Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the past 1,000 years. Their military leaders studied war like other species studied art. They had books, simulations, and historical records going back 10,000 years. Every battle they fought followed careful plans made years in advance. They believed war was a science, and they had mastered it completely. High Commander Zeth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Victory, and watched the blue planet on the viewscreen. Earth. The humans called it home. His advisors had spent 50 years studying these creatures from a distance. They had intercepted their radio signals, watched their entertainment broadcasts, and analyzed their military history. They are primitive, his chief strategist Vorn had said during the planning meetings. They fight among themselves constantly. Their weapons are crude. Their ships barely leave their own system. This conquest will take perhaps 3 cycles at most. Zeth had agreed. The humans showed no sign of faster-than-light travel. Their strongest weapons were nuclear devices that they seemed afraid to use. Their nations could not even agree on basic matters like climate or economics. How could such a divided species resist the might of the Corvani? The invasion fleet consisted of 200 warships, each one capable of turning a continent into glass. They had brought ground forces numbering in the millions, supported by robotic combat units and atmospheric fighters. It was, by Corvani standards, a modest force. They had used larger fleets to conquer species that actually posed a threat. "Begin the approach," Zeth commanded. "Follow standard protocol. Destroy their military installations first, then their communication networks. They will surrender within days." The fleet moved toward Earth with cold efficiency. Corvani ships used gravity manipulation to travel between stars, bending space itself to cross vast distances. To the humans watching from their observatories, the alien fleet simply appeared in their solar system one morning, like ghosts materializing from nothing. Earth's response was chaos, exactly as the Corvani expected. News broadcasts showed panicking crowds. Governments held emergency meetings. Religious leaders preached about the end times. Military forces around the world went to high alert, but their missiles and jets seemed laughable compared to the ships descending from the sky. The Corvani made their first attack on the 3rd day. They targeted military bases across the globe simultaneously, using precision energy weapons that vaporized everything within a 1-kilometer radius. Bases in North America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East vanished in flashes of blinding light. Thousands of soldiers died in seconds. Zeth watched the destruction with satisfaction. Their command structure will collapse now. Send the surrender demand. The message was broadcast across all human frequencies. The Corvani offered simple terms: surrender completely, and the human species would be allowed to live as servants of the Empire. Resist, and face total extinction. They gave Earth 24 hours to respond. The humans did not surrender. Instead, something strange happened. Within hours of the attacks, surviving military forces began reorganizing. Communications networks that the Corvani thought they had destroyed came back online, using methods the aliens did not recognize. Encrypted messages flew between nations that had been enemies just days before. Old rivalries disappeared overnight as humanity faced a common threat. "This is unexpected," Vorn admitted, studying the data. "Their recovery speed exceeds our projections." Zeth was not concerned. "It does not matter. They have no weapons that can harm our ships. Let them reorganize. It will only make their eventual defeat more complete." The ground invasion began 1 week later. Corvani dropships descended on major cities across the globe. The plan was simple and proven. Occupy population centers, install military governors, and crush any resistance with overwhelming force. They had done this dozens of times before. The first dropships landed in New York, Beijing, London, Moscow, and Tokyo. Corvani soldiers marched into the streets, expecting terrified civilians and scattered resistance. What they found was something else entirely. In New York, the Corvani encountered barricades made from overturned vehicles and construction materials. Human fighters attacked from buildings, from subway tunnels, from rooftops. They used weapons that seemed primitive but proved deadly at close range. Rifles, explosives, even improvised devices made from household chemicals. The Corvani soldiers had energy shields that stopped most projectiles, but the humans quickly learned to aim for the gaps, to attack the joints of Corvani armor, to target the eyes and throats of the alien soldiers. They learned these tactics in hours, not weeks. In Beijing, human forces used the city itself as a weapon. They collapsed buildings onto Corvani formations. They flooded subway tunnels where aliens had taken shelter. They cut power to entire districts, forcing the Corvani to fight in darkness while human soldiers used night vision equipment scavenged from destroyed military bases. Commander Zeth received reports from the ground forces with growing concern. Casualties are higher than expected. The humans are not behaving like conquered species. They will break eventually, Vorn assured him. All species do. But the humans did not break. Instead, they adapted. Within 2 weeks of the ground invasion, human fighters had captured Corvani weapons. Within 3 weeks, they had figured out how to use them. Engineers working in hidden laboratories took apart alien technology and began understanding it. Scientists who had never seen extraterrestrial materials before learned to work with them through trial and error, through sacrifice, through desperate innovation. The first human to successfully fire a Corvani energy rifle was a former electrician from Detroit named Marcus Cole. He had no military training. He had no scientific background, but he had spent his whole life fixing things that were broken, and to him, an alien weapon was just another machine with parts that needed to work together. Marcus taught others what he learned. Those people taught more. Knowledge spread through the resistance like fire through dry grass. The Corvani had never seen anything like it. How is this possible? Vorn demanded, studying the intelligence reports. The Vrelian species took 200 years to reverse engineer our weapons after we conquered them. The Sorthai never managed it at all. These humans are doing it in weeks. Zeth had no answer. His carefully planned invasion was falling apart, and he did not understand why. The humans had a word for what they were doing. They called it adaptation. It was something they had practiced for their entire existence as a species. Changing environments, changing threats, changing circumstances. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have ended most species. They had built civilizations, torn them down, and built new ones from the rubble. The Corvani did not know this. Their intelligence reports had focused on human weapons, human politics, human weaknesses. They had not considered human strengths. They had not understood that the chaos and conflict in human history was not a sign of weakness, but of constant evolution. Humans fought each other because they were always testing themselves, always pushing, always looking for better ways to survive. Now that pressure, that relentless drive to adapt and overcome, was directed at the Corvani, and the aliens were about to learn a painful lesson about underestimating the creatures of Earth. The war entered its 3rd month, and High Commander Zeth finally admitted to himself that something had gone terribly wrong. His ground forces were taking losses at rates that should have been impossible. Human resistance fighters seemed to appear everywhere at once, striking Corvani patrols and supply lines before vanishing into the landscape. They used knowledge of their own terrain that the Corvani had no way to match. Every forest, every city, every mountain range became a trap. Zeth called a meeting of his commanders aboard the Eternal Victory. The mood was grim. "We have lost 30% of our ground forces," reported General Thax, who commanded the armies. "The humans are using our own weapons against us now. They have even begun modifying them." "Modifying them how?" Zeth asked. Thax pulled up images on the view screen. They have increased the power output of captured rifles by almost 40%. Our shields are no longer fully effective against them. We do not know how they achieved this. Vorn studied the images with disbelief. This should not be possible. Corvani weapons technology is the result of thousands of years of development. These creatures barely discovered electricity 2 centuries ago. And yet they are doing it, Thax said. Our soldiers are afraid. They say the humans learn too quickly, that they change tactics between battles, sometimes between hours. We prepare for one strategy and they use another. This was the core of the Corvani problem. Their military doctrine was based on careful planning and proven methods. Every battle followed established protocols that had worked for centuries. When one strategy failed, they would retreat, analyze, and develop a new plan. This process typically took months. Humans did not operate this way. They changed their approaches constantly, sometimes in the middle of combat. A tactic that worked in the morning might be useless by afternoon because the humans had already found a counter for it. They shared information instantly through networks the Corvani kept failing to destroy. In Moscow, a human commander named Elena Volkov had developed a new form of warfare. She called it adaptive resistance. Her fighters never used the same approach twice. They studied Corvani responses to every attack and designed their next operation to exploit whatever weaknesses they had observed. When the Corvani sent heavy armor to clear a district, Volkov's fighters attacked supply lines instead. When the aliens reinforced supply lines, the fighters melted into the civilian population and struck somewhere else entirely. When the Corvani tried to isolate the civilian population, Volkov organized protests and passive resistance that made the alien occupation impossible without killing millions. Zeth ordered her eliminated as a priority target. 3 assassination teams were sent. None returned. The humans had somehow learned to detect Corvani stealth technology, apparently by training dogs to smell the specific chemical compounds that the alien camouflage systems released. Dogs. The Corvani had not considered dogs to be relevant to warfare. This was happening everywhere. Human ingenuity kept finding solutions that the Corvani had not anticipated. In Africa, resistance fighters used mirrors to blind Corvani pilots, causing several dropship crashes. In South America, they discovered that certain local plants produced toxins that were harmless to humans but deadly to Corvani biology. In Australia, they trained birds to interfere with Corvani communications equipment. The aliens had studied human military history, but they had missed something important. Humans did not just fight with weapons and soldiers. They fought with everything. Every tool, every creature, every piece of knowledge they had ever accumulated became a weapon when they needed it to be. Chief Strategist Vorn presented his analysis to the command meeting. I have studied the pattern of human adaptation. It is not random. They are using a method, a way of thinking that is different from ours. Explain, Zeth demanded. We Corvani value stability and perfection. Our technology, our tactics, our society, all are refined over many generations until they reach their optimal form. Then we preserve them. Change is slow and carefully controlled. Vorn brought up images of human history. Wars, revolutions, discoveries, disasters. Humans are the opposite. They value change itself. Their entire history is a series of rapid transformations. They abandon old methods without hesitation when new ones prove better. They do not seek perfection. They seek improvement. That sounds inefficient, General Thax commented. It is, Vorn agreed. Most of their changes fail. Their history is full of mistakes, of dead ends, of ideas that proved worthless. But occasionally, they find something that works better than what came before. And when they do, it spreads through their population with incredible speed. This was what the Corvani had not understood. Human society was optimized not for stability, but for rapid adaptation. Their chaotic, competitive nature was not a weakness. It was a survival mechanism refined over millions of years. Commander Zeth made a decision. We will change our strategy. Instead of ground occupation, we will use orbital bombardment. We will destroy their cities, their infrastructure, their ability to resist. We will reduce their population until the survivors have no choice but to surrender. It was a brutal approach, but Zeth saw no alternative. The ground war was unwinnable. The humans adapted too quickly, learned too fast. The only solution was overwhelming force from space, where human weapons could not reach. The bombardment began the next day. Corvani ships positioned themselves in orbit and fired their weapons at human population centers. Cities burned. Millions died. The destruction was terrible beyond anything humans had ever experienced. And still, they did not surrender. In bunkers deep underground, human scientists and engineers worked desperately on new technologies. They had captured enough Corvani equipment to understand the basic principles. Now, they raced to develop weapons that could reach the enemy ships in orbit. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A teenage girl in Japan named Yuki Tanaka had been studying captured Corvani communication devices. She was not a scientist, just a student who was good with electronics. But she noticed something that the professional researchers had missed. The Corvani ships all communicated using a specific frequency band. They seemed to believe this frequency was undetectable by human technology. But Yuki realized that certain human radio equipment could pick up traces of these signals if properly modified. More importantly, she figured out that the signals could be disrupted. Within days, her discovery had been shared with resistance groups worldwide. Within weeks, humans had developed jammers that could blind Corvani sensors and communications. Suddenly, the orbital bombardment became less accurate. Ships lost contact with each other. Coordination broke down. The humans were adapting again, and the Corvani were falling behind. 6 months into the war, High Commander Zeth faced a truth that his people had never confronted. The Corvani Empire was losing. Not just failing to win, but actually losing ground. Human forces had pushed the aliens out of several major cities. Captured Corvani technology was being reproduced in underground factories. Human scientists had developed a crude form of energy shield that could protect infantry from Corvani weapons. Most alarming of all, the humans had built a rocket. Corvani intelligence had detected the launch facility in the desert of what humans called Nevada. At first, they had dismissed it. Human rockets were primitive chemical engines, incapable of reaching orbital speeds against Corvani defenses. The aliens had destroyed dozens of similar facilities in the first weeks of the invasion. But this rocket was different. Human engineers had incorporated captured Corvani technology, combining it with their own methods in ways that the aliens had never imagined. The result was a hybrid system that the Corvani sensors did not recognize as a threat until it was too late. The rocket launched at noon on a Tuesday. It climbed through the atmosphere faster than any human vehicle had ever traveled. Corvani defense systems targeted it, but the jammers built from Yuki Tanaka's discovery were interfering with their accuracy. The rocket dodged and weaved, following a random path that no Corvani targeting computer could predict because the path was not calculated at all. A human pilot was flying it manually, making decisions by instinct rather than algorithm. The pilot's name was James Chen. He was 57 years old, a former test pilot who had spent his career pushing the boundaries of what human aircraft could do. When the Resistance had asked for someone to fly an untested rocket on a suicide mission against an alien warship, he had volunteered without hesitation. The target was a Corvani cruiser called the Relentless Blade. It was responsible for the destruction of 3 major cities and the deaths of millions of people. James had lost his daughter in one of those attacks. He had very personal reasons for wanting to reach that ship. The Corvani tried everything to stop him. Energy weapons streaked through the upper atmosphere, missing by meters as James threw the rocket through evasive maneuvers that should have been impossible. The ship's shields activated, a shimmering barrier of force that had never been breached by any weapon in Corvani history. James did not try to breach the shields. Instead, he flew directly into them. Human scientists had discovered something interesting about Corvani's shield technology. The shields were designed to block weapons fire, but they had a vulnerability. They could not distinguish between a threat and a harmless object traveling at the same velocity. A rock, a piece of debris, or a rocket that was not firing its weapons would pass through the shields as if they were not there. The shields let James through. His rocket crashed into the hull of the relentless blade at nearly escape velocity. The impact was devastating. The explosion that followed was even worse, as the rocket's improvised nuclear warhead detonated inside the ship's armor. The relentless blade broke apart in orbit. Debris rained down on the planet below. It was the first Corvani warship destroyed by human weapons. High Commander Zeth watched the destruction from the bridge of the Eternal Victory. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. "How?" he finally asked. "How did they find that weakness? We have used shield technology for thousands of years. No one has ever discovered that vulnerability." "They experimented," Vorn answered quietly. "They tested different approaches until one worked. They lost probably dozens of rockets before this one succeeded. They are not more intelligent than us. They are simply willing to fail more often." This was the heart of human adaptation. They were not geniuses. They did not have special abilities. They were simply relentless. They tried things that seemed impossible, failed, tried again with modifications, failed again, and kept going until something worked. Their tolerance for failure was beyond anything the Corvani had ever encountered. In the following weeks, more rockets launched. The Corvani shot down most of them, but some got through. 2 more warships were destroyed. A third was damaged badly enough that it had to withdraw from combat. The Empire had never lost ships to a species they were trying to conquer. The psychological impact was severe. Corvani soldiers began to fear their enemy in a way that soldiers of the Empire had not feared anyone in centuries. Zeth called for reinforcements. The message traveled through Corvani space to the home system, to the halls of the Imperial Council. The request was unusual, perhaps unprecedented. A 200-ship fleet should have been more than enough to conquer a primitive species that did not even have faster-than-light travel. The Council debated for weeks. Some argued for sending more forces, overwhelming the humans with sheer numbers. Others suggested more extreme measures, such as sterilizing the planet entirely. A few voices, quiet but persistent, suggested something that had never been done in Corvani history: withdrawal. While the Empire debated, the humans kept fighting and adapting and learning. In Brazil, a team of engineers built the first human energy weapon from scratch, using principles derived from captured Corvani rifles but manufactured entirely with Earth materials. In China, a physicist named Dr. Wei Liang made a breakthrough in understanding Corvani gravity manipulation technology. He could not replicate it yet, but he was getting closer. In Germany, a network of hackers figured out how to infiltrate Corvani computer systems. The alien encryption was advanced, but it had been designed to resist other Corvani, not humans. Human minds worked differently, saw patterns differently, and attacked problems from angles that the aliens had never considered. The hackers began pulling information from Corvani databases: battle plans, ship positions, communication codes. All of it flowed to resistance commanders around the world, giving them insights into enemy movements that transformed the war. Commander Zeth did not know about the hack for almost 2 months. When he finally discovered it, he could not understand how it had happened. Corvani's cybersecurity was supposed to be impenetrable. "They think differently than we do," Vorn explained. Our security systems are designed against logical attacks, against systematic attempts to break through our defenses. The humans used methods that made no logical sense. They tried random approaches, absurd combinations, attacks that no reasonable mind would ever attempt. Eventually, some of those attacks worked. This was becoming a theme. The humans succeeded by doing things that made no sense. They accepted losses that should have been unacceptable. They took risks that should have been insane. They fought a war that they should have known they could not win, and somehow they were winning it. The Corvani were facing an enemy that played by different rules, and they had no idea how to respond. 1 year after the invasion began, the Corvani reinforcement fleet arrived. 50 additional warships, fresh troops numbering in the millions, and new weapons systems designed specifically to counter human tactics. High Commander Zeth felt hope for the first time in months. But the humans had not been idle during the waiting period. Dr. Wei Liang's team had finally cracked the secrets of Corvani gravity manipulation. They could not build a full, faster-than-light drive yet, but they had developed something almost as important: a gravity weapon that could disrupt Corvani propulsion systems. The first test of the new weapon took place as the reinforcement fleet entered Earth orbit. A satellite, launched weeks earlier and thought by the Corvani to be a communication device, activated its gravity disruptor. The field it generated was small, barely 100 meters across, but it was enough. The Corvani ship Unending Conquest flew through the field without warning. Its gravity drive, the heart of all Corvani propulsion technology, went haywire. The ship spun out of control, crashed into another vessel, and both were destroyed. 2 ships gone in seconds, and the humans had not fired a single conventional weapon. Commander Zeth stared at the viewscreen in shock. How is this possible? They could not have developed gravity manipulation technology. They did not have the theoretical foundation. They did not develop it, Vorn said, reviewing the data. They copied it, imperfectly, crudely, but effectively. They took what we have refined over millennia and created a rough approximation in months. A rough approximation that just destroyed 2 of our ships, Zeth noted bitterly. The human gravity weapons were primitive compared to Corvani technology. They were unstable, short-ranged, and often failed to work at all. But they worked often enough to matter. Corvani ship formations had to spread out, limiting their effectiveness. Concentrated attacks became dangerous because human gravity disruptors could affect multiple ships at once. The reinforcement fleet was supposed to turn the tide of the war. Instead, it found itself fighting for survival from the moment it arrived. On the ground, human forces launched their largest offensive yet. They had spent months preparing, building weapons, training fighters, and planning operations. Now they struck at Corvani positions across 3 continents simultaneously. In North America, human forces used tunnels that had been dug in secret to appear behind Corvani lines. In Europe, they employed electronic warfare techniques that blinded alien sensors and communications. In Asia, they unleashed biological agents that were specifically designed to target Corvani biology while leaving humans unharmed. The biological weapons were controversial even among the human resistance. Some argued that they were crossing a line, using methods that could lead to genocide. Others pointed out that the Corvani had already killed hundreds of millions of people and were trying to enslave the entire species. In the end, practical necessity won out. The weapons were used. The effect on Corvani forces was devastating. The alien immune systems had no defense against Earth pathogens that had been modified to attack their specific biochemistry. Soldiers fell sick by the thousands. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Entire units became combat ineffective within days. General Thax, who had commanded the ground invasion, died from one of these engineered diseases. His last message to Commander Zeth was a warning. These humans are not like other species. They fight with everything, without limits, without mercy. We should have destroyed them from space when we had the chance. Zeth knew that Thax was right. The Corvani had tried to conquer humanity the same way they had conquered so many other species. They had followed their proven methods, their time-tested strategies, and they had failed because humans did not play by the same rules. The Empire had won so many wars because they were patient, methodical, and overwhelming in their force. They outplanned their enemies, outproduced them, and wore them down over years or decades. Against species that valued stability as they did, these advantages were decisive. But humans valued change. They valued adaptation. They valued the ability to become something new when the situation demanded it. Every time the Corvani developed a counter to human tactics, the humans had already moved on to something else. It was like fighting water. No matter how hard you struck, it simply flowed around the blow and found another way forward. The Imperial Council made their decision 3 months after the reinforcement fleet arrived. The losses were unsustainable. The conquest was impossible. The Corvani would do something they had never done in their 10,000-year history of warfare. They would withdraw. High Commander Zeth received the orders with a mixture of relief and shame. He had failed where no Corvani commander had ever failed. He had been defeated by a species that should have been trivially easy to conquer. But as he prepared the withdrawal, he realized something. The humans were not finished with the Corvani. Even as the alien fleet began to pull back, human ships were launching from the planet. Crude vessels, barely capable of reaching orbit, but armed with weapons that could hurt Corvani warships. The humans were pursuing. This had never happened before. Conquered species, when their conquerors withdrew, typically collapsed into relief and began rebuilding. They did not chase their former oppressors into space. They did not seek revenge. But humans were different. They had adapted to being prey, and now they were adapting to being predators. In the command center of the largest human orbital station, a facility that had been built in secret over the past 6 months, Admiral Sarah Mitchell studied the tactical display. She had been a submarine commander before the invasion. Now she commanded humanity's first space fleet. "They're running," her executive officer reported. "Corvani forces are breaking orbit and heading for deep space." "Track them," Mitchell ordered. "I want to know where they go and start planning the next phase." The next phase. It seemed impossible to even consider it. Just a year ago, humanity had been a planet-bound species that had never encountered alien life. Now they were preparing to take the war to the stars. The Corvani had taught them how. By trying to conquer Earth, they had given humanity the technology, the motivation, and the knowledge to become something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. A species that adapted not just to survive, but to dominate. The Corvani withdrawal was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of something else entirely. 5 years after the invasion, humanity had spread beyond Earth. Colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter served as staging points for exploration and expansion. Human ships, incorporating stolen Corvani technology with human innovation, traveled faster and farther than their alien teachers had ever thought possible. The Empire watched with growing alarm. A species they had dismissed as primitive was becoming a galactic power at unprecedented speed. Human ambassadors appeared at neutral stations throughout the galaxy, seeking allies and trading partners. Human explorers mapped systems that the Corvani had never bothered to visit. Human scientists published discoveries that challenged Corvani understanding of physics and biology. High Commander Zeth, who had been disgraced after the failed invasion, spent his final years studying the humans. He wrote extensively about their nature, trying to warn his people about what they had unleashed. "The humans are not our enemies because they hate us," he wrote in his final analysis. "They are dangerous because of what they are. They adapt, they change, they grow. Where we see perfection to be preserved, they see potential to be unlocked. Where we see stability as the highest goal, they see it as stagnation. He continued, "We made a terrible mistake when we attacked Earth. We gave them a reason to direct their adaptive abilities outward, toward the stars. Before, they competed with each other, wasting their potential on internal conflicts. Now they compete with us and with every other species they encounter. They will not stop until they have surpassed everyone." Zeth died before he could complete his work, but his warnings were heard. The Corvani Empire began preparing for a new kind of war, one where they would be the ones fighting for survival. On Earth, humanity built monuments to those who had fallen in the invasion. Billions had died, cities had been destroyed, and the scars would take generations to heal. But they had survived. More than that, they had transformed. Marcus Cole, the electrician who had first learned to use Corvani weapons, became a symbol of human adaptability. Schools taught his story to children, showing them how an ordinary person had changed the course of history by refusing to accept that something was impossible. Alina Volkov's adaptive resistance tactics were studied at military academies across the planet. Her methods became the foundation of human strategic doctrine, emphasizing flexibility, rapid learning, and the willingness to try approaches that seemed crazy. Yuki Tanaka received the highest civilian honors that humanity could bestow. Her discovery of Corvani communication vulnerabilities had saved millions of lives. Now, she led a research institute dedicated to understanding alien technology. James Chen, the pilot who had destroyed the relentless Blade, was remembered as a hero who had given everything for his species. Statues of him stood in cities around the world, and every human spacecraft carried a small plaque with his name. These individuals represented something larger. They were examples of what humanity could do when pressed, when challenged, when told that something was impossible. They had not succeeded because they were special. They had succeeded because they were human, and humans refused to accept defeat. The galaxy was beginning to understand this. Species that had lived in fear of the Corvani Empire for millennia saw that the invincible conquerors could be beaten. Human ambassadors found receptive audiences among dozens of alien civilizations that had suffered under Corvani rule. Alliances formed, trade agreements were signed, information flowed between species that had never communicated before, and humans were at the center of it all. They were not the most powerful species in the galaxy, not yet, but they were becoming something perhaps more dangerous. They were becoming a catalyst. Wherever humans went, change followed. They brought new ideas, new technologies, new ways of thinking. They questioned assumptions that other species had accepted for thousands of years. They pushed, challenged, and transformed everything they touched. The Corvani had sought to conquer a primitive planet. Instead, they had awakened a force that would reshape the entire galaxy. 20 years after the invasion, humans developed their first true faster-than-light drive. It was not based on Corvani technology, though it had been inspired by studying their systems. Human scientists had taken a different approach, one that the Corvani had never considered. The result was a drive that was actually faster and more efficient than anything the Empire possessed. When news of this development reached Corvani space, it caused a political crisis. The Empire had always been the technological leader in the galaxy. Their superiority had justified their conquests, their dominance, their very identity. Now a species that had been pre-industrial 2 centuries ago was surpassing them. Some Corvani called for a preemptive strike, an attempt to destroy humanity before they became too powerful. Others argued for negotiation, for finding a way to coexist with this new force in the galaxy. The debate consumed the Empire for years. Humans did not wait for the Corvani to decide. They kept building, expanding, and adapting. Their fleet grew from dozens of ships to hundreds, then thousands. Their colonies spread across hundreds of worlds. Their population, reduced by billions during the invasion, recovered, and then exploded. The species that had almost been conquered became the dominant power in their region of space within half a century. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, now in her 80s, commanded the defense of human space from a massive station that orbited Earth. She had lived to see humanity rise from near extinction to galactic prominence. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. A young officer approached her with a report. "Admiral, our scouts have detected Corvani fleet movements near the border. It looks like they might be preparing for something." Mitchell studied the data. The Corvani were indeed massing forces. They had been doing this periodically for decades, testing human defenses, probing for weaknesses. So far, they had always backed down before any serious confrontation. "They're still afraid of us," she said. "Good, let them stay afraid. Should we reinforce the border?" Mitchell shook her head. "No, send a diplomatic team instead, offer to talk." The officer looked surprised. "Admiral, we've proven we can fight them. Now we need to prove we can live with them. Adaptation isn't just about warfare. It's about finding the best way forward, whatever that might be." This was the lesson that humanity had learned from the invasion. Adaptation was not just about survival. It was about growth, about becoming something better. The Corvani had forced humans to change, and that change had made them stronger. But strength alone was not enough. True adaptation meant knowing when to fight and when to make peace. The diplomatic mission to the Corvani border was the first step toward a new relationship between the two species. It would take decades of negotiation, but eventually, humanity and the Corvani would reach an understanding. Not friendship, perhaps, but mutual respect. The Empire learned to see humans not as primitives to be conquered, but as equals to be reckoned with. And humans learned that their adaptability was not just a weapon, but a tool for building something lasting. 100 years after the invasion, a Corvani scholar visited Earth to study the species that had defeated his ancestors. He walked through cities that had been rebuilt from ruins, talked with people whose grandparents had fought in the resistance, and tried to understand how such a young species had accomplished so much. At the end of his visit, he wrote a single sentence that would become famous throughout the galaxy. "We tried to destroy them, and instead we taught them to reach the stars." Humanity had proven something important, not just that they could survive, but that they could thrive. Not just that they could adapt, but that adaptation itself was a form of power. They had taken the worst that the galaxy could throw at them and emerged stronger than before. The universe was vast and full of dangers that humanity had not yet encountered. There would be more challenges, more threats, more moments when survival seemed impossible. But humans would face them the same way they had always faced such moments. They would adapt, they would change, they would grow. And they would never, ever give up. This was the legacy of the invasion. This was what the Corvani had failed to understand. You could not conquer a species that refused to stay conquered. You could not defeat an enemy that learned from every loss. You could not destroy a people who treated every setback as an opportunity to become something new. Humanity had looked into the abyss of extinction and found not despair, but determination. They had seen the face of a superior enemy and decided to become superior themselves. They had been told they were primitive, weak, and divided, and they had proven those judgments worthless. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.